Okay, welcome back. This is episode 5, and we are finally going to apply these animations. So right now, in our last episode, we brought in our artwork and we modified each of these sprite sheets for our 4 animations right now. And we created these animations here in another folder called animations, and they're all going to be controlled by the player animator. Now that animator is on our player currently right down here, and we're going to be implementing this, controlling it through our code here. So I'm just going to actually save that, so that's up to date now as well. Okay, so let's take a look at the animator. Now to get to your animator window, I have it here already, but I'm going to show you how to get it once these scripts update, and we'll break it down really easy. Okay, so mine I have hiding behind my scene right here, but let's assume maybe you don't have it. We can close that tab. You go to Window and you go down to Animation and you want the Animator. Okay, and it's going to pop this open. We can scroll in and out. Moving around here is actually not as easy as you think. You kind of click and you can highlight things, but you think you could right click, but you have to hold Control, or sorry, Alt. You hold Alt and then click with left click, and now I can move and see everything going on here. So let's talk about this and how the animator works. So here's entry when the game starts, and it goes directly by default. It has to go to one of our animations. Because the first one we created was called IdleBot, it's choosing this. So this animation plays when we start our game, but it doesn't go to our running animation, jump, death, nothing else happens. So we're going to control this using parameters. So we're going to click the parameters choice here, and you're going to start with an empty list. So on this list, we're going to add some parameters, and we're going to adjust these parameters through our script that already controls our player. So let's add a new float, and this float we're going to call speed. And the speed is going to allow us to tell the animator to run the run bot animation. So once that speed is not 0, we're going to run this animation. So we're going to need a couple bools as well. One bool is going to be called isGrounded, and you probably guessed it, that's going to be checking if our player is grounded. Once they're not grounded, it should play the jump animation, and when they become grounded again, we're going to need to make it transition to idle or the run, depending if we're moving left or right. And we're going to add one more bool, and this is dead. So the is dead bool is just checking, of course, once we've died, we're going to run the death bot animation. We're going to implement this later because currently we don't have anything in our scene, in our level, that can hurt us. So we'll approach that later on when we dive into a little more specifics with the colliders and some other artwork that we're going to bring in, some hazards that could hurt our player while we play the game. Okay, so what do we need to do first here? Before we script anything, we need to create some transitions. Okay, so the first transition we're going to do is to do the running animation. So you're going to click this box, this idle, you're going to right click and you're going to make a transition. You're going to get this arrow. We want to connect it to the run bot. Now you can move these around however you like, but we need to look at this transition specifically. Once we go to a transition, we don't want any exit time. Okay, that's great for 3D animation, but for us with pixel art, we want it to happen right away. So we're going to open up our settings here, and you want to always transition duration, set that to 0 for our purposes. Okay, if you want something to be delayed, you could do it here, but that's not the case for ours. So once we fix that, that's ready to go. We're going to scroll down here though, and this is where we're going to use those conditions with these parameters. So we want to move from idle to run if speed, so once we press, let's add one, we can choose any of our speed, grounded, dead. We're going to use speed, of course, here. And if it's greater than 0, we're going to go just a little bit higher in 0.1. We want to start that animation. Okay. And so that's the condition that we need. Now we need to go back. What if we stop moving? Well, right now there's nothing that's going to return us to the animation. So we're going to make another transition here. That one's ready to go. Right click, make transition, and we got to go back to the idle. So again, we're going to click on the transition. We're going to get rid of the exit time and set this to 0 and move down, and we're going to change our condition just slightly. The speed needs to be less than 0.1. Okay, and this is going to work soon. We need to update this speed. The speed value is not going to change in our game whatsoever until we control it in the script. So let's go back to our scripts. We're going to go to our player. We're going to scroll down to our player movement script here. We're going to double click that. And here we are. So first thing first, we need access to the animator, like any of our components. So we're going to do this with public, and we're going to bring in the animator, and let's just call it animator. Okay, and we're going to assign that in the inspector shortly. Now, how are we going to implement this? So horizontal input, this is where we're collecting it right here, and we need to know we need to also update the animator's variable, or that parameter, on the speed. So that's really easy to do. We're going to access our animator, and then we're going to do something. There's a series of set functions. So set bool, set float. There's going to be set int and all kinds of things in here. But what we're going to be using is set float in this case, and it needs two parameters. So we see here it's asking for what's the parameter, and we're going to do this by string. And that parameter, we called it capital S, P-E-E-D for speed. And we're going to update that, and we're going to get that directly from the line above the horizontal input, right? So that, because that's returning either -1 or +1. We're going to have a problem here though, because remember we said it had to be greater than 0.01. Well, that's easy to fix. So if we have a negative number, that's not going to transition. What we're going to do here is we're going to use a function called mathf.abs, and that's for absolute value. So it's going to take this value, and no matter what it is, it's going to force it to be positive. That's absolute value function there that we can utilize. And now I'll save this script, and this should work. So let's give it a shot and see if we actually transition to our run animation. So we're going to let these scripts update, and I'm going to leave the animator window open so that you can see the speed changing. Okay, and you can also see in our game window the animation. So we should be able to make sure this is all viewable. Just move everything over a little bit. Let's test this out. So you're going to see as we go into the scene, it's going to start to loop the idlebot animation. Once it starts up here, here we go. So it's looping the idlebot animation, but we run into a problem. I'm moving and it's not working. It's not flipping. It's keeping everything where we don't want it to be. We're not transitioning to the run, and that's because a simple thing, and we see it in our error down here, we don't have a reference to our animator. So remember, I created this on my player in my script right here, but I didn't reference it. So let's move that over, and now let's give it a proper test here. Here we go. So our animation is idling. We don't have any errors in our console. So let's try to move now. And you can see as soon as I move, it starts to run to the run bot animation. So I'll try to zoom in here if I can. You see this a little better, that you can see that his little legs are starting to rotate when I'm moving. Okay, and this is where you might go to the animation and say, look, maybe based on my player movement, and you notice that we don't have a jump animation playing yet, but we can see our little player running around here. And I noticed I fell into that platform a little bit, so I'm going to show you how to fix that on the collision detection. And yeah, we're just jumping around here, but it is playing my run animation. It is a little bit hard to see because it is flashing so quickly, but we can see it is functioning in our animator, and it's transitioning back to the idle. Okay, so let's pop out of that. And I mentioned that collision that I just noticed. We're going to go back up here, and we're going to change collision detection to continuous. And that's going to pick up on our collisions a lot better here when we build this game eventually. Okay, so how do we get the jump animation playing? Let's go back into our script here. Oh, first I should say, we're going to need to move this over a little bit. Okay, and when we jump, we want to do this from any state, whether we're idling or running. So a great way, instead of making all these connections with all these transitions, we can actually make a transition from any state. And this works great for jumping. It'll also work great for death eventually. So we can go into our jump animation here, and we're going to set a couple conditions this time. Okay, so again, we in our settings here, we don't have exit time clicked, so that's clicked off right now. Our transition, we want that to happen immediately, so set that to 0. And now our condition, what do we want to change? Well, of course, we're going to look at the is grounded. So when it is grounded true, we wouldn't want it to play the jump, so we want it when it transitions to false. Okay, so now that we've switched that to false, this should transition to the jump animation. Now, we need to check another thing, because when we make animations, they default to looping. So let's take a look at our animation folder here and look at jump, and we see that loop time is initialized. We want to click that little box there. That way it's no longer going to loop. Okay, we can open this now, and I can test to play this on my player if I like. It's still going to loop this while it's demoing, but it won't loop in our code. We also want to change one more thing on this transition, and that is to transition to self. We don't want it, otherwise it'll continuously transition. So we want to click that button as well. For jumping, we don't want it to transition to itself the same way our run animation does. Okay, now we're going to pop over to our code, and we need to update this ground. All right, so right here we are getting this ground is telling us whether we are or are not grounded. So we're going to put our animator check right after that. So animator.set, and this time it's going to be set bool, because we're changing the a true or false value. And this one again is called is grounded. Make sure you spell it exactly the same. And we're going to set this to is grounded, our bool that we already have in this script. And this should actually work as is. Now, we can't transition back right now. If we notice in this animator, just make sure I go back and save this. We're done. That's all we need to script, very quick. But over here, we don't have any transitions to go back. So this, from any state, it's going to go to the jump animation, play it once, and it'll be stuck. So we need to fix that. We can have one of two things happen. We could land and we're idle, or we could land and begin running right away. So we're going to need to create those transitions. So from the jump, we're going to go back to the idle. And in this transition, again, no exit time. And then we're going to set this duration to 0. And on down below here, we're going to have two conditions. Okay, our two conditions are going to be our speed. If we're going to idle, we need it to be less than 0.1. And we need to create a second condition, of course, that grounded is now true. So those two conditions need to meet, and it will transition back to our idle. And we're going to make one more transition. We're going to move to the run in case we kind of land and we're moving forward or backwards at that exact time. So in this transition here now, again, exit time off, transition to 0, and then scroll down here. We're going to do the same two conditions. This time speed needs to be greater than 0.1, and also our is grounded needs to be true. Now everything should transition nicely between our animations. Again, the death will come later, so let's give this a test and see if it works. Okay, again, I'm going to try to make this window bigger so we can see it better. We can see our idle is playing because we are grounded. If I'm moving, we have transitioned to the run animation. And if I jump, we can see my little legs lift up, his mouth opens up, and we can see my jump animation plays. But as soon as I land, it goes back to idle. But if I'm running, it'll go right to the run animation. And everything seems to be working great. I fall off that edge. You can't see me anymore, but we can see that it's not looping the jump animation. It only played it once. So everything is working great. I'm happy with this. And that's going to conclude this episode. We have our a pixel art player, and it's animating between idle and running and jumping. And we're going to move into the next episode. Thanks.